Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ed DeVicente, Sustainability Co-Chair for AIA Santa Barbara, and we're glad you could all make it. The committee and I have been working really hard this year to bring everyone relevant sustainability training and content, and quite honestly, there's been a lot to keep up with, as you all know. So whether it's through 3C Rent offerings, or AIA California, or even some of our local presentations. We appreciate everyone's involvement, and yeah, please spread the word to your firms, your associates, to continue to tune in. There's many things, and so before we get into an introduction and have Alelia start, a couple of things just to note. Thank you, Tara. Just a couple weeks ago, AIA California declared a climate emergency. So this is putting more onus on us as architects to really step up and help lead in the building decarbonization zone. So stay tuned to that. A lot of the resources we have are through our website that you can connect directly to the 3C Rent offerings and also AIA California. So take a look through that and the link, share it again with your firms to stay on top of the latest and greatest offerings. So our committee sustainability sponsor is Hayward. So thank you as always to Hayward for your support this year. And we're just thrilled that we've been able to produce so much content and really bring that to the chapters. So with that, I'm going to introduce Alelia Parento. She is let me get the title here, Alelia, the Energy and Climate Manager for the City of Santa Barbara, and she's been working really, really hard, not just behind the scenes, but I think you've seen this year really a lot in the public to really ramp up make the public aware of the decarbonization process the City of Santa Barbara is engaged in. And as you'll see in this presentation, part of that is the electrification ordinance. So this is one element in a broader path that the city is going down for decarbonization. So we're excited to bring her knowledge and expertise to all of us today to really bring us up to speed on what electrification means and at a practical level, what that means as architects. So at the end, we'll have time for questions and comments, and we'll be happy to answer them. So if you could, please type them into the chat box and we'll get them organized and have an opportunity to answer your question. With that, Alelia, thank you for joining us today and sharing with AIA Santa Barbara.
Thank you so much, Ed. And I'm going to share my screen to bring up my PowerPoint. So just give me a second here. And as Ed mentioned, I work for the city. I'm the Energy and Climate Manager, and we have a lot of work that we're doing throughout the city that's really relevant to your particular group. So I'm really excited here to be presenting and fielding some of your questions and figuring out how we can work together moving forward. So today, the main focus of the presentation is our recent work around the natural gas prohibition and then how that might grow into future efforts. First, I wanted to introduce what my division does. And so you can kind of get the full picture of the things we're working on. So we really manage the city's energy and climate efforts overall as an organization and for the community. We meet the council's renewable energy goals. We're tasked with figuring out how to achieve council's carbon neutrality target. We work on climate adaptation, so sea level rise, wildfire mitigation. We work with neighbors around the region to figure out how we can maximize our impact. And then we actually implement projects. I'm working with Ed on a solar project at the Granada Garage, for example, where we're trying to build resilience and local energy reliability. We have launched our Together to Zero campaign, which is that umbrella campaign for the carbon neutrality target. We're doing a climate action plan update right now, which is really looking at how do we reduce significantly or get rid of completely our local greenhouse gas emissions. And that's part of what we're talking about today. So aiming for zero. Again, a little context, and many of you probably know this, but we have a climate in crisis. It sounds like the AIA has recently declared that an official emergency. And really, we're seeing that happening on a global scale. So per the IPCC report that came out a few years ago, irreparable damage will occur if the global temperatures rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius. California as a state has a carbon neutrality goal by 2045. So we're just a little bit ahead of the curve with our 2035 target here locally. But you can see that the time is of the essence from this chart over here on the side. We're already feeling impacts of climate change with our expanded fire season, historic droughts, temperature increases. I don't know about you guys, but when I moved here, it was never 90 degrees. Now it seems like it's all the time. And changes to our biodiversity, especially in our channel here. And then it's really important to take a step back and look at, well, where are our emissions coming from here in Santa Barbara? And we're a little bit of a different mix than the rest of the state or even the rest of the nation, because we don't have a lot of industry here locally. And so our emissions really fall into two main categories. Almost 60% is transportation related, and that's pretty standard. It's always the biggest hitter. But almost 40% here in Santa Barbara is related to building energy use. So it creates a really big opportunity when we start looking at building electrification. Of that nearly 40%, it's almost half and half natural gas and electricity. And that will become very relevant in a moment. So achieving carbon neutrality, there's no silver bullet to get there. It's going to require many different strategies that we're currently developing. But today, what we're really focusing on is building decarbonization and that piece of the pie that's related to those 39% emissions. So what is the role of buildings? Well, if you look at buildings, they are a very significant source of emissions. Plus, once you build a building, it's a long-term asset. So you're locking in those future emissions for decades to come. And there have been really significant advances that we'll cover in a moment in system technologies that actually make this transition not only possible, but attractive in most cases. Additionally, something really special is happening here locally, and that is that we are decarbonizing our electric supply. So right now, a lot of our electric supply from Southern California Edison is made up of natural gas, and that's because it's a consistent source of fuel. You can create power at any hour of the day. And so it's just been a really reliable system for them. The state has mandated that the electric grid become cleaner and has set what's called a renewable portfolio standard that increasingly requires renewable content in the power portfolios and completely carbon-free by 2045. So even the big utilities are having to face this, but they're doing it a little bit differently than we are. So and I really like this chart over here on the right because it shows you the impact as the electric grid becomes cleaner, the reductions of greenhouse gas emissions related to your building as that happens, right? So today, the 2020 bar graph, you can see if we completely decarbonize the electric sector, you have an immediate drop of about 45% emissions in your building. But because in Santa Barbara, we're actually moving towards completely carbon-free, and I'll cover that more in a minute, we're getting to over 82% reductions basically by next year. And so that's a really big step for us. So how are we doing that? Well, we have something called Santa Barbara Clean Energy that's launching. This is a city initiative, and it's called a Community Choice Energy Program. So there was a law passed a while ago that allowed local jurisdictions to take over the procurement of power on behalf of their communities. So we are not taking over the poles and wires. Edison maintains those, and those are really their bread and butter. We just take over the contracting and the sourcing of the power. The nice thing about that is we get to choose what that power mix consists of. And in Santa Barbara, because of our strong goals, we're defaulting to 100% carbon-free electricity. There are some options. You can opt down to less carbon-free content and maintain your rate at exactly what it is with Edison. There is a slight premium of about $5 a month for the average home for the 100% carbon-free content, but it's a much better product. What this does is it opens up pathways for us to deeply decarbonize those two main sources of emissions, cars and buildings. And so that's a really exciting step. You may have heard a lot of talk about decarbonizing natural gas. So renewable natural gas is the product the gas company has been pushing a lot. And this is a really promising development for certain applications. There are things that we simply won't be able to electrify quickly, heavy freight or industry, existing buildings, we'll talk about in a minute why they're a little trickier to electrify at the outset. So renewable natural gas is a great sort of stopgap solution for those things that are harder to transition. There's also a lot of talk about hydrogen, and it comes with its own limitations as well. The existing pipeline and distribution infrastructure, as well as your home and appliances, can only handle a small percentage of hydrogen mix before significant upgrades are required. We're already seeing that play out in Europe, and it's clearly not ready for a system-wide upgrade. So what's our opportunity? Well, as we see it, it's to use something called a REACH code, sometimes referred to as a stretch code, and really it's a building code amendment. And so local jurisdictions are allowed to amend local building codes as long as certain exemption or conditions are met. And exemptions are allowed based on the local jurisdiction's decision, and it must be cost effective. And that has to be proven through and study based. So that's a really important point to keep in mind. So what are the impacts of REACH codes, especially this one where we're prohibiting natural gas in new construction? A lot of people have asked us if it's worth doing since there's so little new construction in Santa Barbara, and really we resoundingly say yes, primarily because we are mitigating those future emissions of those long-term assets. We're also sending a very clear market signal as we join 46 other cities who have done something similar, that this is the trend and that the industry needs to start investing in more and more of these technologies to make them even better and more attractive. And then as you can see, it sort of gives us this proof of concept. This chart shows you like the slow adoption with the new construction, gives you the proof of concept, lets the industry catch up, and then you have a very quick adoption as existing buildings are better able to electrify. So going back to that point about cost effectiveness, that is a requirement. And the reason why we focus on new construction in this ordinance is because that's the only way to equivocally make it cost effective. So you have the avoided costs of not continuing the natural gas infrastructure from the main to the building and throughout. New construction homes wouldn't require a panel upgrade because you're building it right-sized. And so you don't need to change anything out that's existing. And there's increased appliance efficiencies. So especially as we see more and more demand for air conditioning in our area, air source heat pumps, which are the recommended appliance for heating in an all-electric home, actually provide heating and cooling. So you're not buying two appliances, you're buying one, and that appliance is 400% more efficient than a forced air unit. Additionally, you guys all know this, there's a solar mandate on most new buildings, especially residential. And so you are literally able to generate the power on site for a lot of these appliances, and that's a really big savings measure. So it's really important to know, we get this a lot, people like to bring up the gold medallion homes of the 80s and how terrible an experiment that was and how no one likes to cook on electric. And so I like to bring up that it's very different today than it was back then. So first of all, when you're talking about cooking, everyone thinks about these types of stoves when they think of an electric stove with the hideous coils that don't heat evenly. And that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about induction cooktops. All of the manufacturers make them, including the high-end manufacturers like Wolf and Viking. Incredibly consistent and controllable heat, improved air quality because you don't have the off-gassing of the natural gas. No burn danger, the surface does not get hot. And it is becoming a chef preference in certain cases. So that's some work we have to do to keep proliferating that, but it is certainly better than it used to be. And then space heating. In California especially, we think of these two types of resistance heating, and that is not what we're recommending today in the all-electric space. So today we're talking about air source heat pumps, which again can provide the heating and cooling. There's no electric resistance, so the resistance piece is what typically is associated with higher cost of heating. The air source heat pumps are really, really efficient compared to an FAU, and I actually have a graph on that in a little bit. Water heating, you know, when people think of electric water heating, they think of all resistance, and so very expensive and time consuming. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about hybrid heat pumps. So they have some resistance heating for the quick ramp up if you have a really fast need for hot water, but really they use a heat pump technology to maintain the heat. The nice thing about that too is they can provide sort of thermal storage, if you will. If there was an outage, they would store the hot water into the night or whatever you would need. And this one's a bit contentious, fireplaces. So, you know, the electric fireplaces of not that long ago are pretty cheesy. You see this multicolored situation here that doesn't look very realistic. But there have been huge advances made in electric fireplaces. So now you have ones that use holograms, water vapor, you know, visual, audio, sensory things to make it really resemble a real fireplace. And so, yes, this has some room for improvement, but it's already made tremendous, tremendous advances. So that's promising. So again, back to the cost thing, a lot of folks, as we were going through the process of passing this ordinance, said, well, it's going to cost people more. People's bills are going to go up. And what's really important to remember is that, yes, electricity costs more than natural gas per unit, but the appliances are so much more efficient that you actually end up, it's a wash. So for example, here, an air source heat pump, which is what we'd recommend, is 400% more efficient than a standard efficiency natural gas furnace. So for every million BTU output, you end up equivalent. So it's really important to remember that moving forward. Another piece of feedback that we got throughout the process is it too soon? The grid can't even keep up with our current demand. How is it ready to transition to all electric? Well, a lot of folks are surprised to hear that 25% of US homes are already all electric. So this is actually not a new technology or new space, and actually they're rapidly becoming more so. I used to have a graph that I unfortunately don't have here that shows the dramatic increase in all electric homes in the past 2 decades. Really showing that this is a trend that's continuing. Additionally, back on the affordability piece, we're seeing a lot of affordable building developments that are being built all electric. And so if they can do it, you know, we really feel like it's something that we can get everyone to be able to afford. So what to consider when you're designing an electric building? Well, it's not that different. The main thing is the panel size, which again, with the solar requirements, you're already putting in a 200 amp panel, and that's generally enough size for what you need. And then the main difference appliance wise is the water heater. So a heat pump water heater is bigger than a standard natural gas water heater. And so it does require more space to store it. And it also vents cool air because it's removing the hot air the hot heat from the air and then venting out cool air. So you can either pump that into the home if you want to use that cool air. Sometimes you wouldn't want to use that, and so you could have to pump it outside. Additionally, a heat pump water heater is going to be more costly than a resistance electric heater or a natural gas water heater, but long run, it won't cost more to run it. So, oops, lost my, there we go. So what about the grid? So back to the grid. Can it handle it? The cool thing about the grid is it's currently what's called a summer peaking system, meaning that all of the grid capacity, or how much energy can be put onto the grid, is designed around the highest use times, which tends to be the summer when the air conditioning is on. So what we're talking about here adds load in the winter mostly for space heating. And so it actually levelizes the grid to a certain extent, which is really great. Also, we're not talking about an overnight transition. New buildings are a great first step, and then we have to tackle existing buildings, and that will be a slow and thoughtful process that will allow lots of time for the grid to catch up. Additionally, CCAs or CCEs like Santa Barbara Clean Energy are building substantial amounts of renewable energy supply and storage infrastructure around the state to help offset grid reliability issues, and so that's really exciting. And we have local energy assurance efforts, again, like that solar project at the Granada Garage that I mentioned at the beginning, that is intended to really continue to build that local energy independence and reliability. Also, the grid of tomorrow is smart, and electric appliances really fit into that picture very, very well. So how the grid is moving is as an interactive organism, if you will, where capacity communications can be sent to your appliances and they can toggle back as the grid is strained and be brought back online as it's not. And so that's a really exciting development that people can participate in, and in a lot of cases actually make money doing. There are a lot of incentive programs that pay you for what's called demand response. So that's exciting. And what about when the power goes out? Wouldn't you want the natural gas as a backup? Well, most modern gas appliances don't work with electricity. They require electric ignition, except for your stove, which is the biggest exception, but then you wouldn't have indoor air ventilation, and that would be very dangerous as well. So really, it's not a great backup. Additionally, if the gas system goes down, which has happened in our area a few times, it's much longer to reinstate than the electric system. So that's just something to consider. Again, the best approach is to build those local energy resources, which we're actively doing through Santa Barbara Clean Energy and Council's other renewable energy goals. And so just touching upon that resilience, what can we do to build that resilience locally? And it's really coupling all these things together, more deeper energy efficiency and continuing to really push the envelope on how little energy buildings use, coupling that with renewable energy supply and battery storage, and then really innovative things like vehicle to grid technologies as more and more electric vehicles come online, allowing them to really coordinate with the building to create this sort of symbiotic virtual power plant, if you will. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the other great benefits of going to an electrified building, which is avoiding investment into a carbon-intensive system. In fact, everywhere else in the state where it's a dual fuel utility like PG&E, which operates the electricity and the gas, they've been in full support of electrification ordinances because they don't want to invest into a system that's going away in the future. So it's really here where we have a dual fuel system that we're seeing more tensions around that. There's also some significant costs and benefits in terms of greenhouse gas reductions, which directly leads to improved public health and the reduced impacts of climate change, which we've already gone through in this presentation. There's also the opportunity to build green jobs, the solar industry, the battery industry. These are all areas of tremendous growth that can funnel into workforce development. And then, of course, there's health benefits. There were a couple studies that came out last year that showed up to 42% increase in childhood asthma in homes that burn natural gas indoors. So that is concerning and something that we want to be addressing. So before I give it up for questions, I wanted to just summarize with a few points because I'm sure it'll come up. One is the ordinance we just passed is for new construction only, and new construction is defined as a building that's never been occupied for any purpose, or where 75% of two of the following, so two of these things have to be met, the roof, the foundation, or the exterior walls are being removed and replaced. So we did that on purpose to avoid really any additions or alterations that we could anticipate being impacted by this. And we intend to deal with existing buildings differently. So for existing buildings, we think we would need to have a more carrot approach, if you will. So where we're providing education, similar to the 3C REN classes that Ed was mentioning earlier. You know, how can we get you, the designers and the contractors and everyone more comfortable with these technologies and installing them, and the homeowner more comfortable with using them? So developing those educational resources and then coupling that with incentives, and incentives that would just be enough to tip the decision-making over into electrifying your building. Existing buildings are much harder to make cost effective because you typically need the panel upgrade. You don't avoid that bringing of the infrastructure from the street to the building, and because appliances aren't failing at the same time. And so you're having to sort of piecemeal this upgrade unless you make a very concerted effort to sunset your appliances early. And so that's why we think this very different approach is required here, where you can help people get their building ready for electrification, and then it's easier to transition as appliances are retired. And then a really important thing that I hope we can talk about after the presentation is how you can help and how this, what's your role in this? And you have a big role. First, it sounds like a lot of you are working on this already, is learning about these new electric technologies and what is the latest and greatest and how is it working for people. And then educating your clients on electrification options. I think a lot of people are really resistant. And even if it's an existing building, maybe trying to convince them to do space heating or water heating, because those are really the two big culprits of natural gas use. Your stove doesn't actually use that much natural gas. And so, really focusing on a space heating and water heating would be a really huge help and a big impact on our local greenhouse gas emissions. And then identifying gaps in the local understanding of building electrification. You can help us figure out where the education is needed by telling us where building owners or contractors or you, the designers, are unclear or have questions about what the right approach might be or sort of next steps or a starting point. And so that is really, really helpful information for us if you can give us that. With that, I would like to open it up for questions.
All right. Let me kick it off while people type into the chat any questions. We got a couple there. But so, Alelia, when does the new ordinance go into effect?
Oh, thank you, Ed. So the new ordinance was adopted on July 27th, but it doesn't go into effect until the new year. And it will be for any project that submits a building permit application by January 2nd, 2022, will then be subject to the ordinance.
Okay, great. And then what about, you touched on it slightly, what about the broader climate action goals? How can architects participate in those conversations? Is there a specific timeline or dates we should be putting in our calendar or being aware of?
So the carbon neutrality goal is by 2035, which feels like tomorrow to me. So that's we're trying to work as fast as we can. We are doing the climate action plan update right now, and we've done, you may have seen a pretty big community push to get community input. We had a survey where we got more than 1,100 responses. We did a couple of community brainstorming sessions and some other climate chats. We're taking all that data and we're distilling it into some potential strategies. And once we develop draft strategies, we're going to be coming back out to the community. So we would love to run those by you guys to see if you think they're actionable, especially in terms of green buildings, because you guys are the experts there. So that is coming in the fall, this fall.
Sounds good. So the committee and Tara will stay tuned on what you're up to there and make sure that it gets broadcast to the broader chapter for those when those opportunities come up. Okay, so let's go to some of the group's questions here. I'm not sure if you'll answer this or I will, but how do new electric water heaters do with hard water?
Oh, that's a great question. As far as I know, they do fine, but that is a good question. I don't know if anybody else here has experience with that.
Yeah, I might jump in here. Basically, all hot water heaters, they struggle with hard water. It goes to the durability and of the unit itself. We already know this is a major issue for like tankless gas water heaters. A lot of them don't even warranty it without a water softening system. So yeah, I think it's just a good practice for soft water systems for longevity of any hot water system. I know the electric resistance ones were problematic, but I think the heat pump water heaters, because it's not the heating element necessarily, but the loop in there heating the water, they do a little bit better, but it's still an issue for any hot water system. So let's go to the next question. The question about gas barbecues. Are gas barbecues an option in new construction, or is there any exceptions that we should be aware of?
Yes, so there are some exceptions. Gas barbecues are not one. The council considered a bunch of exemptions, including gas barbecues, pools and spas, restaurants, and a few others. And where we ended up was restaurants are exempt. And that was really a COVID response, right? Trying to give the restaurants a little breathing room to respond to COVID and recover. And then they were exempting laboratories and clean rooms, which we don't have a lot of here, but we would like to encourage them to come. and they really can't design their systems without certain amounts of natural gas. And then public interest projects. So public interest projects would have to be deemed in the public interest by the permitting authority, which is the chief building official. And it would have to be shown that the public benefit outweighs the cost of combusting the natural gas. There's also an exception for infeasibility. So if you can prove that you're building such a large swimming pool that it's infeasible to use electric heating because it's been proven feasible for smaller, like normal sized residential swimming pools, but for a really large Olympic sized swimming pool, that might be harder. You could apply for an infeasibility exception, and the permitting authority would have to approve that. There's also,
and all that would be done through the building department process for the building permit itself, correct?
That is correct, and it is reviewed by our group as well. So she's getting support, if you will, on the review with all of us that are sort of have a stake in this ordinance.
Okay, excellent. So here's another question from the group, and this goes to the broader conversation. I'll make a couple other announcements and points here too regarding this. Do you know regionally, like are any other jurisdictions locally, especially the county, considering a similar REACH code to what the city just adopted?
So they're moving closer to it. They are not actively in the process yet, but they are starting to look at, now that 46 cities, including Santa Barbara and even Ojai, have done it, it's becoming more and more feasible for them to entertain. So I think they are sort of eyeing how they might. And there are different types of REACH codes, right? We went all the way to a prohibition. You can also do a electric preferred model where you're requiring all electric buildings just to meet Title 24, and mixed fuel buildings have to exceed it. So there are different constructs of the REACH code that folks have adopted.
Okay. Excellent. So a couple other points of interest are here for our team. It's a lot to keep up with, as I mentioned. So part of the AIA California, their climate action statement and emergency is they're going to be working with the state of California to push for state carbon neutrality to go from 2045 to 2035. So additionally, they're going to advocate for accelerated electrification for all new projects across the state by 2022. So AI California is getting really aggressive with this. And I think you'll all see through Alelia's presentation, it's because the time is right. You've seen there's been a lot of improvements in the grid and becoming much cleaner. And also the technologies are really exist there. And they're not new technologies. Heat pump technologies have been around for a long time, or refrigerators operate off of them. It's just the packaging of it and also subcontractors' knowledge of installation. So that's one thing. The other big thing to announce is just yesterday, the 2022 Energy Code was approved by the Energy Commission of California, and this is now moving into the Building Standards Commission. And this is pretty typical of every year, our 3-year cycle. So that draft of what was approved is available online. Some of you may have already seen this in the news just last week. And one thing to note is now, solar and battery are going to be required for newly constructed commercial buildings as well. So this is our energy code that will ramp up January 1st, 2023. So stay tuned. Of course, through 3CREN, all these new energy code update trainings will be coming online. This will happen within the next year and a half before things, we have to practice with them. So that's just a couple other things that I wanted to point out. So let's see some other questions that came in here. Are there any incentives for electrification that you're aware of? So this may go more towards the retrofitting side. Are you aware of anything in that, or something we should be maybe advocating for, Lelia?
So it's always good to advocate. I'm a big proponent of that. And there's no incentives offered by the city yet for the new construction or the existing building. However, we did recently get word that the utility incentive program, so Southern California Edison, which previously wasn't allowed to incentivize fuel switching, so going from natural gas to electricity, is now allowed to. So there are more and more programs, even through the utilities, that allow you to do that. The other really cool thing about that program, I mentioned Santa Barbara Clean Energy, is that because it's not a for-profit entity like Southern California Edison, any profits realized are reinvested into the program, either through rate relief or incentives. So it would definitely be one of our priorities to develop an incentive for building electrification, or maybe for the panel upgrade, or once we figure out what are the biggest stumbling blocks, how can we incentivize folks to take that step? So they're coming. They just are going to take a little while because we have to launch the program first. And I saw that maybe it was asking about incentives for the actual permitting. So we don't have anything yet, but we are considering, we actually launched earlier this year on-demand permitting for solar and solar plus storage for a residential building. So I don't know if any of you have used that, but you're basically able to go onto the city's permitting software and get an instantaneous permit for a solar or solar plus storage system. And we are planning on expanding that ultimately to heat pump water heaters and air source heat pumps, so that it is a quicker turnaround and makes it easier to do.
Yeah, that's great. Most of those types of permits are subcontractors and contractors go direct to the city, and usually architects aren't even involved with some of those. So that's great to hear that it's going to be expanding. And then I think we're all aware too of the broader, what Congress is doing and President Biden on the broader infrastructure. That there's a lot of money there, and of course, who knows how this is all going to work out in the next couple of months and where everything's going to get allocated. But there may be a big push on incentives for remodeling for energy efficiency of homes, going to electrification as well. So stay tuned on that. As we know more, we'll see how that might affect architects. AI National is really into this too on the advocacy side. So if that's important to you, please participate at the national level. I'm sure they'll welcome it as well. So a couple other questions here. Is 200 amps enough for your average home if it's all electric? Good question, Alex. I think so. Aurelia, have you seen that and kind of the analysis that's been done?
Yeah, and that does seem to be the pretty typical approach, the 200 amps. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Let's see. Stephanie's got a question. Is there a percentage of increase of cost for an all-electric heat pump water heater and air source heat pumps compared to gas? So is that from an operation standpoint or a purchase standpoint? I guess you could probably address both. It's one of the great things, Aurelia, I've seen is, as you've been doing your presentations, is there's a lot of science and industry kind of analysis and experience that's really formed the backbone of your presentations, and why not just yourself, but many other jurisdictions have been able to promote this as now's the right time. Yeah, I think my understanding is there can be some additional upfront costs for the actual equipment itself, split system, heat pumps, et cetera, but generally that's offset by the lack of the infrastructure need of bringing in the gas. And then ongoing, do you recall if it's about equal for electric on these appliances versus gas use?
Yes, exactly. So especially with those two big users, the space heating and water heating, you're seeing, per that chart I showed, you're basically seeing the same cost because of the efficiencies of the appliances. So again, even though the fuel cost is higher for electricity, the efficiency is so much greater that you're using, it's costing you the same ultimately. And you're absolutely right that the upfront cost of the appliance is offset from not continuing the service into the building.
Right, but as we've seen, I mean, this is the story of California and our energy codes, and we've lived this as architects for many years now. As the industry adopts these energy efficiency materials, programs, appliances, the costs do start to come down as adoption, not just creating the products, but also installation and a better understanding just of the trades. So over time, they do tend to go down, which is, if you pay attention to what Ed Masri has been saying for a long time as he goes around the world And that's why he's been pushing for a zero code here in California in particular, is because where California has gone, the rest of the world is following, because we're really kind of become a proving ground for a lot of these energy efficiency technologies. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time. We're going to continue as the Sustainability Committee to bring you guys knowledge, training, and understanding. So just stay tuned again through the website on the opportunities to stay on top of this and educate others. So let's see. So one other question, we can probably get to wrap up here. If a building permit is doing a remodel in addition, is gas infrastructure and appliances allowed to remain?
Yeah, so great question. Yes, anything that's existing in place, you know, in a building is allowed to remain. The thing that was discussed at council is, what about a disaster-related tear down? Can you rebuild with gas in that case? And council actually took the stance that you shouldn't be able to, because we want to do this right, and it's kind of a good point to build it right. So any remodel or addition that already has natural gas, you're good to go, but a disaster rebuild is not considered for grandfathering.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then another question from Dwight. Are there any specific contacts for SCE incentives to transfer from electricity to gas? That's a good question. Do you know the answer to that, Alelia?
So their website is the best place for that, and they have a whole incentive section. And because they're changing so rapidly, it's hard to keep tabs on. And I would just recommend you take a look or call your representative.
Yeah, I'll take that one step further. David Intner is a great resource for all of us. He works at SCE. He actually offered to help our chapter as well. And I want to see if there's interest from the group, which it sounds like is a follow-up to Alelia's great presentation. Dave has a lot of resources for how do you implement this. And as well, he's familiar with the Savings by Design program, which now has a new name. But there's a lot of things in Edison's their programs that I think we can probably talk to Dave and see if we can't bring something forward to pass on, either through some website links, or maybe we can get him to do a presentation. So anything else for Alelia? If not, I'll spend just a minute or two just to wrap things up.
And you're welcome to send me questions about the Santa Barbara Clean Energy Program too, because that's a really, really big deal. It's a huge benefit to us locally in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so if anyone wants to follow up, I'd be happy to provide more information.
And we will be posting the recording of this on the sustainability page of our website. So keep an eye out.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Tara. Alelia, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on things and all your hard work to get our community to this point. It's awesome. So a couple of other things to note. Yes, this is all moving very quickly, architects. So please do loop in your fellow staff members and associates through the website of what's going on. Heads up, Tara will be broadcasting this shortly. In October, we have a tailored workshop series for 2 days that will be specific to how do we as architects market and adjust our business models to really market for low energy buildings and construction. So stay tuned to that. November, we are going to take on an additional sustainability month for the AIA. So our committee is hard at work at putting together another speaker to bring to you, and also a series of additional training. And all of this is going to roll through into next year because there's just so much to stay on top of, and we're going to make sure that we bring you all kind of the most top of mind and relevant things, and the things that are out there that are most important for our local community and architects. So thank you all for your time today for this lunch, and I really appreciate you all joining us. And we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you for having me.